So back at the event where Apple announced the M2 iPad Pro and the 10th generation iPad, the most exciting thing to come out of that event for me was the announcement that we were finally getting a full-blown desktop video editor on the iPad, because the M2 and the M1 processors in these Pro iPads could definitely handle it. And that video editor was Blackmagic's Davinci Resolve. And after watching a bunch of videos of YouTubers getting the beta for it, I finally got it, and it's not quite ready yet. So I'm going to give my honest thoughts on it right now. Let's get into it. Now, for me as a video editor, I use Final Cut Pro almost exclusively, and only recently did I really experiment with using Davinci Resolve for my exclusive video editor. And I bet you probably can't guess which videos I actually did in Davinci Resolve because, well, it's just that good of an editor. And I did it all on my Windows PC, which ironically enough was slower than my Mac, even though my Mac is much smaller. But that aside, it is an extremely capable editing tool, and especially considering that unless you need some of the higher end features, it is a free editing tool, it's really hard to argue with. Yeah, Final Cut has the argument of a price but a perpetual license, but not having to pay anything at all is a pretty good point for Davinci Resolve compared to literally everyone else. But again, I tend to lean more towards Final Cut Pro, so I would have preferred to have Final Cut Pro on the iPad, but obviously Apple isn't going to do that. So Davinci Resolve is the next best thing. And I was super excited when I saw the announcement, but I also kind of looked at it and figured that maybe it wasn't completely ready yet, because at the time that it was first shown off, we only saw the color editing tool and the cut tool. And I figured, well, yeah, obviously that's probably all they have at the moment because this is the first time they're showing it off. Then I got my hands on it, and that's literally all it has. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with Davinci Resolve, along the bottom you have a couple different tabs, and each of those tabs is very important because it lets you switch between different workflows, including the media editing tool where you can go in and import your media and work with it. You do have the cut tool. This is not my ideal editing environment just because it doesn't quite look the way that I'm used to, but also having just a set zoom for your timeline and then having a tinier view up at the top really isn't intuitive. The more intuitive one is the actual edit tab, and that is what I've used almost exclusively because, especially if you boot up Davinci Resolve for the first time on a Windows PC or any computer that can run it, it actually asks you what editing tool you're more familiar with. And if you pick Final Cut, all your key commands are the same, and when you're editing straight off of the edit tab, it feels a lot like Final Cut. It's extremely, extremely nice. But yeah, that editing tab's missing. Also, the media tab's missing. But then we also have the color tab. And Davinci Resolve is the best color grading tool, period. In fact, a lot of the color grading that I've done with my current videos has been in Davinci Resolve, which I then export and put as a completed color graded video into Final Cut, because I can edit faster in Final Cut, but I can grade so much better and so much more finely in Davinci Resolve. And fortunately, that is something that is on the mobile version. We'll dive into that a little more later. But then you have the Fairlight tab, and that actually gives you the ability to edit your audio, add reverb or an equalizer, basically anything you want to do to adjust the background noise, the vocals, or if you're looking to add background music, but maybe turn it down or adjust how it plays overall, that's where you go, and that's also missing. And the last one that's missing, and they kind of give you a weird alternative for it on the mobile version, is the Deliver tab, because you can export any video as you would hope you could on the iPad, but it just gives you a handful of selections. It doesn't let you go kind of into the weeds with it. So you are missing out on a lot of options, including the ability to scale back or scale up your bitrate depending on the size of the file or the amount of detail you want to retain when exporting footage. So the fact that we only have the color tab and the editing tab means that we have one of the best parts of Davinci Resolve, and for me, one of the worst parts of Davinci Resolve, and no in between. Like I already mentioned, the cut tab is not the most intuitive editor in the world because you spend a lot of time going back and forth on the timeline just to get your cuts together, and then because it's at one set zoom, getting everything layered and trying to deal with audio layers plus overlays and all that kind of stuff just makes it a hassle because you can't zoom out and see all of it from a bird's eye view unless you look at that little bar at the top, but then you can't sort of zoom super close to edit frame by frame and then zoom way out to add things like a one-size-fits-all background track. Now, something I discovered when I was looking into this a little further is that there is the ability to turn on these other tabs. You just have to bind them to a key command. However, it's very clear by the way that the export, the delivery tab works, and by the way Fairlight looks, that it's not ready for the iPad yet. So while it's cool that you can do that, I don't recommend it because my concern is that for somebody who potentially wants to use this as their main editor, they should either wait or use LumaFusion, because trying to use an unfinished version of the tool or use an unfinished portion of the tool could lead to issues where you might damage or lose the footage for one of your projects. So it shows that there is the possibility of getting that stuff back at a later time. And I really hope that that is the case, because Davinci Resolve, like I said, is a very powerful tool, but the fact that the only way to edit your videos with the cut tab is not that great. And while the media pool for Davinci Resolve is pretty good, the actual management tool you get with the media tab is so much better. Also, not being able to do anything with your audio other than adjust the levels without having Fairlight, that's a bit of a pain in the ass too. However, if you are just looking to use Davinci Resolve as a color grading tool, at least for the moment, considering we don't have any other editing tools, that is actually much more viable because the iPad Pro has, in my case, the best display in the house. Like, my main editing screens are two HDR 500 monitors that have been color calibrated by hand, and they are fantastic. But when it comes to the mini LED 12.9-inch display with 1600 nits of peak brightness for HDR color grading, the iPad is very hard to beat. Also, with the way Blackmagic's been optimizing Davinci Resolve, it actually renders as fast or sometimes faster than Final Cut Pro on the M platform, specifically the M1 platform. So it's actually very viable to be using this as color grading, which is actually what I've been doing in a lot of cases. Because at the end of the day, Davinci Resolve is an extremely powerful color grading tool that began to kind of evolve into a full-blown editor and then became essentially a very powerful editor with an extremely powerful color grading tool baked right in. Despite the fact that I can't edit a full video on this, I still love the fact that I can do a full color grade with multiple nodes, LUTs, the whole 9 yards, right on my iPad, export it off of this extremely powerful tablet that Apple just refuses to put anything more powerful than iPad OS on, and then take that finished project and throw it onto my Mac to edit it the rest of the way. It is so nice, and it shows a lot of potential, and that's kind of the thing. I think that if they had taken a little more time to finish all of the other things that people moved to Davinci Resolve for, this would have been groundbreaking. This probably would have really shifted the overall, I guess, view of the iPad Pros, because at the moment we have what is essentially a MacBook Pro in a super thin, battery-powered touchscreen thing, and we don't have enough Pro software, if any Pro software, to really take advantage of that hardware. I mean, Apple's not putting Final Cut on it. We have Affinity Photo, which is iPad-based but extremely powerful, and then Adobe's dragging their feet to actually make their Pro tools useful. So the potential for Davinci Resolve to really push everything forward, make other companies sit up and realize that, hey, you can basically put a full desktop environment on this and it won't bat an eye, it's such a missed opportunity because it's not done yet. I often don't recommend people get something with the promise of it getting better later. However, because Davinci Resolve doesn't cost anything, it's not quite the same investment because you don't have any money put into it. However, it's still not ready. So if you want to try it out, go for it. If you really, really know how to dive into the weeds with color grading, it's fantastic and you can't really beat it. But if you're looking for a full-blown editor that's ready to roll, that you can throw onto your iPad and basically turn your iPad into a mobile editing rig without buying a Mac, maybe look at LumaFusion, at least until you get something better with Davinci Resolve. And yeah, LumaFusion costs money, but you can actually edit with a more familiar timeline. At the end of the day, I love the potential that Davinci Resolve brings to the iPad Pro, but I really, really hope that it gets better with time, because if they drag their feet like Adobe, it's just going to turn into another dead end that's going to be the bane of most power users' existence. And fun fact, you can actually run Davinci Resolve on an iPad mini. I watched a channel where they tried that. You can check them out there. But I wouldn't do that. I would at least do it on the iPad Pros, but even then, I would at least wait until they put the editing tab onto the iPad Pro, because then it would actually be useful. But that's been it. I'm kind of disappointed, but also still kind of hopeful that this becomes something. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Are you excited that we're finally getting some actual pro software on the iPad, or do you think it's still just an iPad? I'm curious to know. So leave your comments down below. If you like this kind of content, make sure to like and subscribe, because that is the quickest and easiest way to make sure that I am able to make more stuff like this and that you'll actually see it. So make sure to do that. And aside from that, I'll see you all in the next video. Make sure to be there and have a good one. Oh, for anybody who hasn't clicked away, I have another channel. It's called The Chaotic Collector. I'm posting some stuff over there later this week. I'm going to be talking about film, and I got a bunch of stuff in my collection, so go check that out. There will be a link to it in the description. But anyway, yeah, bye.